Okay, we've been talking for a while now, so you're going to be picking up in the middle of a conversation. But first of all, let me introduce myself at the very least. My name is Dan DiDio. I am a co-publisher of DC Entertainment, and thank you. And I'm really excited to be here. Naturally, as you can only imagine, it's always great to be back in New York, but this is the first panel for me of the convention, and probably the most fun. The man to my left, I want to make sure I got it right. Left is the man on my left.
You're improving.
Probably needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. You might know him from the works that he's done with other companies, from the seminal body work on Daredevil, the incredible work on Sin City, director, writer, singer, you don't sing. And
sure as hell don't sing.
Okay, and I've seen you dance, and you sure as hell don't dance either.
Right.
Mr. Frank Miller.
Hello there.
Okay, now you guys are going to have to settle a bet for us, okay? Because we're in the back room over there and we're chatting it up. And before we get into the actual panel, I have to ask you guys a question. How many die-hard DC Comics fans here right now? Die-hard. Been reading it? Okay. Okay. You know everything inside and out.
For Dan, that's 12.
Well, I can make the most obscure references, and you're going to get it, and you're going to go, oh, God, yeah, that's great. Let me see if I get the reaction. So, Mr. Frank in the back room, you wanted to bring back a character.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Come on, you convince them, because you can't convince me.
Yeah, I actually offered my services to DC Comics to bring back an old and revered character who's been neglected for a long time, who I really think is deserving proper treatment by history, and wanted to bring my best of my abilities to it, and Dan didn't think he was worthy of bringing back. I thought it was time for Brother Power the Geek to come back.
Okay, now does anybody here really know who Brother Power the Geek is? Okay, you over there, could you describe who Brother Power the Geek is? Yeah. Yeah. So basically, and he's right, it's Joe Simon. It was in the 60s. So we have a 50, 60-year-old man writing about the hippie generation.
Yep.
First mistake. Second one, the character was a rag doll that was leaning against a radiator, hit by lightning, comes to life, and decides to join the hippie movement. Okay? And Frank wants to bring that back.
Geek was genius.
And you know what a geek is, too. Does everybody know what a geek is? It's somebody who bites the head off of chickens. And how do you work that into the story, Frank?
That would be telling.
Okay, so needless to say, we've decided to pass on that. But actually what we want to do here now is actually one of the things I really enjoy. And we sit and chat a lot, and this is really just more of a conversation. What I love about it, it's really a sense of just the fun of making comics, the enjoyment.
I'm sorry, I want to start I want the letter campaign to start tomorrow. This geek thing has to happen.
Okay.
Okay, do it online.
I think you guys finish Dark Knight first, okay? Let's get that done.
What?
Okay, so, you know what? But in doing this too, I just don't like to just concentrate on his body of works, because the most interesting thing about Frank is that if you look at his overall body of work, DC is probably one of the places you contributed the least in some ways. You know, we have the Dark Knight books, we have Ronin, Batman Year One.
Yeah, it just happens to be the ones you all remember.
Yeah. And I mean, I love the stories you tell. And I'm going to go back. I want to talk Daredevil for a few minutes, because even though it's the DC panel, I love your stories about the character and just the genesis of how you got that. And first of all, let's go back to yourself. Let's go right to the very beginning.
Notice how he keeps asking questions and never wants an answer?
Okay, let's start. When did you first know that you wanted to work in the comics business?
I told my mother that I wanted to write and draw comic books for the rest of my life when I was 5 years old.
And what characters did you enjoy that made you pick such a career at such an early age?
Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, by far and away.
Oh my! Have you ever worked on those characters?
Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes?
Yeah.
No, I've always wanted to. What I love about the Legion of Superheroes was no idea was too bad for it. Bouncing boy. But wonderful, wonderful, really sick touches. Triplicate Girl gets reduced to duo damsel. You can't make this stuff up. It's beautiful.
Actually, they did make that stuff up.
I know.
Okay, so in that case, so here is his 5-year-old Frank Miller looking and wanting to join the Legion of Superheroes and hang out with folks like Bouncing Boy and Triplicate Girl.
Yeah.
When did you decide, and then ultimately, when did you make the move and first break into comics yourself, and how did you do that?
Oh, I did it the way an awful lot of people did it. My father drove me down to Manhattan, and I had a friend from high school who was willing to let me share the apartment with her, and had a place to stay there. And then I pounded the pavement. I walked around and made phone calls, and tried to get interviews for work. Had a terrible time for a month or two there, but eventually got. Back then there was a company called Gold Key Comics that published an awful lot of stuff. A lot of it derived from TV shows, and I got my first job from Gold Key doing a Twilight Zone comic. I did a not memorable job on a couple of Twilight Zone stories, but that got me professional credentials so that I was able to get a meeting with Paul Levitz at DC Comics. And there I got Weird War Tales and strange little jobs like that. But after I became known as reliable, and after I'd learned enough from other people, particularly the one I always do mention is Neil Adams, I got enough of a reputation to get the Cat's Pajamas, which was a regular job. DC Comics offered me a comic book called Claw the Conqueror or something like that. It was kind of a bad Conan ripoff. And I was cocky enough to go over to Jim Shooter at Marvel Comics and say, look, I just got offered a regular job. And he said, I can't give you a regular job, you're not good enough. But I'll keep you busy. And so I got things like Marvel 2-in-1 and Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, odd jobs like that. In one of these Spider-Man jobs, this other character named Daredevil appeared, and I loved the character. Things went lucky for me. Gene Colan, who'd done the Daredevil title for precisely 2,000 years, ran screaming off it and left the title open, and I campaigned to get it, and Shooter took a chance on me. So I got my first regular work.
And that was, you started as an artist on the book first, correct?
Yeah. I worked on the artist for a year or so.
And how did you...
It was bi-monthly at the time.
And how did you make the transition over to writer-artist?
The writer left, and I'd been doing a great deal of the plotting all along, and I'd been working with Jim Shooter, who had taught me a terrific amount about storytelling, and he decided to take a chance on me as a writer.
Is that something that you've always aspired to at that age, when you're first breaking in? Did you see yourself just as an artist, or did you always want to be something more than just an artist on a book?
Well, I always wanted to do both, because I believe it's one craft, that you can do it as a team, but I mean, just the same way you can do music as a duo or as a solo act. But I always thought that comic books, were like newspaper strips. There's no reason one person can't do them. And since what I like to do is tell stories in every manner possible, I always wanted both jobs at once. Now, what this does is give me the best of all possible worlds because I get to work with other people in different capacities. I mean, I've obviously spent a fair amount of my career writing stories for other artists, and I enjoy doing that a great deal too.
And also the other side is that, I've seen at that point in your career, and one thing that always caught me surprised is the amount of time you spent on Daredevil. Did you ever expect to be on this book for almost 3 years?
Once, I had no idea what was going to happen. As far as I knew, I was just lucky to have the work. And when I first started, I thought, well, I'll just do this for the rest of my life. This will be great. As time went on, the success of it led to more encouragement and more pressure to stay on it. Across time, however, my ambitions changed. And I wanted to, I didn't really feel I wanted to make an entire career of working on characters that were created by people who were dead. And that I wanted to contribute something new to the field. I didn't just want to be a gardener. And so I was already bringing new characters into Daredevil all over the place. So I felt I had to branch out and do new work.
And is that when Jeanette reached out to you for Ronin?
Yeah, a meeting with Jeanette Kahn. I mean, I first came up with Ronin as a concept because of a Japanese comic called Lone Wolf and Cub. Yeah, there you go. And oh, please. It's a masterpiece. And I just fell in love with that, and without knowing what I was doing, set out to imitate it, but combine it with everything else I wanted to draw. Because at the same time I discovered Lone Wolf and Cub, I discovered Jean Giraud, Mobius. Forbidden Planet opened in New York and transformed every comic book artist's life because all of a sudden we were looking at a whole world's worth of comics. And so Ronin for me was a giant cauldron for me to take all these influences. So I went from Kojima to Jean Giraud to Hugo Pratt. I bounced all over the place. So the book is a really exuberant mishmash of all these influences.
And where in the process, so where were you working at a time that you realized you were going to be moving on to something as crazy as The Dark Knight? Did I say crazy?
Crazy?
No, that's not crazy. Maybe not crazy. As a seminal. Seminal's the word I meant.
Here I do this modest, reverent children's comic, and you call it crazy. I was approached by, Dick Giordano at DC Comics was in the process of revitalizing the company, and he was using his connections, his history, and his absolute charm to bring talent back to DC during a time when the talent was fleeing it. He did a lot he and Jeanette were quite a combo in turning the company around at that period. And he said, come on, give me a Batman book. And at the time I was kind of scared because Batman was the character I kind of always wanted to do, but I didn't know if I was ready. And Dick just encouraged me. And so I set out to do my version of Batman, and it evolved across the whole series.
And the thoughts behind that, and when you created it, did you see it as a standalone project, or did you see it as something that would have such a long-term effect as it has?
I was just looking to do a really good story. You can't think of your work in a historical context. You might as well be carving your own gravestone. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know what would come of it. Most of what I was concerned about was, will they let me do this next scene? What if I make the Joker really, really bad? Because the Joker had turned into kind of a pansy. He really didn't do that much that was scary. And I wanted him, and what I set about was, I mean, again with Dick Giordano's guidance, he said that you want to do a villain right, you got to give people reason to hate him. And so I came up with more and more diabolical things for the Joker to do, which motivated Batman to become harsher and tougher, hunt him down.
And we've had conversations about Superman's role in that story as well. How did you approach Superman differently than, say, if you approach him in the traditional Superman comic?
Well, were I doing a Superman book, I would have done the opposite of what I did. In the world of Dark Knight, Superman had to be the heavy. Batman and Superman represented very different points of view on everything from a political to a mythological level. Superman is not just an avenger. He's a Dionysian figure. He punishes. He brings chaos and spreads terror in order to meet justice. Whereas Superman is very much an Apollonian figure. He comes from the heavens and descends and brings order and peace. To me, how could there be a world's finest, man? These guys couldn't possibly get along. And so the story was really structured around building to the conflict between the two and leading it to whatever resolution it could have, which of course couldn't be an absolute resolution because you're not going to, the whole world's out of balance if one of these guys goes down. Mix that with the third symbolic figure of Wonder Woman, and you've got the triad of characters that form what I think is the core of the DC mythology.
And in pulling this all together, you mentioned before about you're really carving a lot of new territory with this. Did you ever feel you held yourself back, or did anybody ever tell you to hold back or change what you were building for the story?
Well, Denny O'Neil was always a cautious editor, and he was often concerned about things, and so. But working with any publisher, you're always working within parameters. The publisher has to be, especially a publisher like DC or Marvel, where they are protecting characters for generations, and they're protecting licenses that involve everything from movies to toys. That they are working within parameters. They can't let us all go run amok. But working with that and learning to negotiate and learning to persuade, there's an awful lot of room for fun to be had.
Great. Now, here we go. Then you go from there, and then you do Batman Year One.
Yeah.
Okay, now two questions are this, is that, first of all, was Batman Year One like the other bookend to Dark Knight? You have an old Batman here, and you have a young Batman with Year One. Mm-hmm. And the second was, why didn't you draw that too?
Okay, well, first part of it is where did Batman Year One come from? The genesis of it was really simple. It started from the notes I put together to start Dark Knight. I figured, a basic thing you do as a writer is you write a backstory to put your characters, to figure out who your characters are and to put them in the place they are when the story starts. Now, obviously, in Batman's case, there already were 50 years sitting there of comic books, but I had to figure out for myself what he went through to become Batman. Because what you got was like 2 pages in an old comic that didn't tell you much. You know, his parents got murdered and he got scared by a bat. And he inherited a lot of money. And I thought but in the course of Dark Knight, these notes, I kept scribbling down notes, and more things evolved. Also, I became very fond of certain characters. I became extremely fond of Jim Gordon and of Selina Kyle. And I wanted to see them younger. Batman Year One, to me, was as much about Jim Gordon as it was about Bruce Wayne. Because what he goes through, the trials and tribulations he goes through, in many ways more interesting. Batman was like a monk. Batman was absolutely determined what he was doing, and he was pure. Jim Gordon's a man who's given to temptation, and whose marriage is falling apart, who's going through all kinds of terrible things. But there's this demonic guy haunting him and helping make a better man of Jim Gordon. So it all kind of fell together.
And I mean, that's one of the books that, again, just stays in print for us continuously. But from that, you go back to create our own material. You go back into create our own. And extraordinarily successful with what you have coming out there. And then you come back to Dark Knight. Now, what convinced you to go back and do Dark Knight Strikes Again?
Well, Dan, you guys have got some mighty good characters, and they don't let go. And
Like Brother Power the Geek? No, just kidding.
I'm dying. When do I start? But no, and the thing is that the superheroes were created they were created in two periods in history, the 40s and the 60s. And they were of their time, but they still work. But the ones that have been around for a long time have stood the test of time, and they're so well conceived that it seems silly to go in and reinvent the wheel. I don't have an idea better than Batman or Superman. I've got ideas that are completely different, like Sin City. But if I want to mess with the superheroes, it seems, why put a different costume on them and pretend that I've created something that was created before I was born?
It's interesting. You talk about Sin City. Such a really intriguing, incredible world you created there. And then I look at the Batman Dark Knight universe, again, an incredible world. Is it difficult to go back to those after a while, or do you have to change how you write or think to get back into Sin City? Or how easy can you go from a Sin City book to a Batman book and then back again? Is it hard to do something like that?
I don't know. No, it really isn't. The stories they're waiting to happen. They stew for a long time. And it's just, it takes a completely different mindset to do something as Wagnerian as Dark Knight. Because everything's on an epic scale, everything's huge. There isn't much that's actually intimate, because people don't have small emotions in Dark Knight. In Sin City, there's room for pettiness, room for things like simple regret. Room for things like guilt and shame, and so they're just different worlds. But I guess I can move from room to room pretty easily.
Yeah, I guess the reason I'm asking is that coming out in how personal are these properties to you, and how much are they reflected of your own mood or moment at the time?
Oh boy, we should have a couch. You can't do this kind of work without it reflecting the mood you're in, the circumstances you've lived through, the experiences you've had, and the ways life has changed you. Again, I can't revisit these characters, the same way. You never cross the same river twice. So it's different every time.
Yeah, because the reason why I go to that is that because I always go back to the first time I had a chance to meet you. I just started at DC Comics. It's early 2002. It's post 9/11.
And he was just as sour as he's always been.
You want to see sour? I'm going to describe sour in 2 seconds. So, if I'm not mistaken, issue 2 of Dark Knight Strikes Again comes out. Then we have 9/11.
Oh boy, yeah.
And then we have the 3rd issue comes out later on. And no lie, this is my one time I'm in the office, and this is my fanboy moment when I first started DC. Frank's there. And you work on these oversized boards, just huge boards, much larger than the art boards the other guys do.
I work in the size that people did during the 1940s and 50s. It's called Twice Up. My images are 4 times the reproduction size. They switched to a smaller size because of the actual case that holds the pictures on the scanner.
That determines the art. Yeah. So he pulls one of these boards out, pulls the board out, and he's talking to his editor, Bob Schreck. And you were describing, and I tell the story over and over again, describing about how you use nails and use nails to carve into the board the type of raw emotion you were feeling to get the visceral feel on the page. And it was you could see the rawness and the anger in your describing how you worked on that page itself. And again, we talk about working things through. There's something that affected everybody in such a way, and here you are bringing it to the art in that third piece.
In the business, we call that scaring the editor. No, but anything that works, you try anything that works. I use a lot of nails on my drawings these days, but I learned better ways to do it. A single-edged razor works a lot better and doesn't damage your drawing board. I like using found objects and anything that works to get an effect and just to find out what things do. One of the things that the more you draw, the more and the more you do it professionally, the more you get boxed into set ways of doing things, and that can really lead you to a very narrow path. So you've got to stay open to every trick there is. Again, that's how I've learned so much from the people who came before. Things like getting the right materials, getting the right brushes and paper and so on. But also just to take all those crazy tricks. You never know what's going to happen. All you can do is waste paper.
Do you always feel like you're still evolving as an artist even to this day?
I'm still breathing. Well, I sure as hell hope so.
Okay, so now you had the siren call of Hollywood. You wrote scripts, you directed, you were involved in so much of the process. At any point during that process while you were working in the Hollywood environment, did you feel you were going to give up comics, or did you give up comics for any extended period of time?
Well, yeah, I didn't draw comics for a couple of years there. Working in movies is just wonderful. I mean, it's just an amazing business. It's so exciting. By far and away the most day-to-day exciting work I've ever had. The pleasures and the dangers of it are all a high-pitched level of emotion. You know, the creative pleasure is enormous. Instead of the isolation of working at a drawing board, you're constantly interacting with other people, and having the give and take with the people in the crew, with the cinematographer, and especially with the actors, who are interpreting and reinterpreting every single word you write, and then throwing new words at you, and some of them are pretty damn good. So that is just a festive experience. Mm-hmm. Whereas sitting at the drawing board is solitary, deeply rewarding, and enriching. My ideal life would include both to keep it in balance.
And that's interesting, too, because you have such personal vision in a lot of the work you've done, but you've also been extraordinarily collaborative. You have a wonderful body of work, working with some of the top creators in the business, everybody from Bill Sienkiewicz to Dave Gibbons and to John Romita to so many other folks right now. How do you approach differently? And it's interesting because Hollywood was a creative environment as well. I'm a collaborative environment. How do you approach collaborating versus your individual product, and how do you know when to give and take?
Well, I love teaming up with somebody else. When I'm writing a story and somebody else is drawing it, and I love the regular phone calls back and forth, the meetings face to face where we go over stuff, and just the things that emerge. The way you get to know the other guy is fascinating. Just to pick one, working with David Mazzucchelli. He had been doing Daredevil, and he was the guy who he drew kind of like, I mean, he drew beautifully. He drew kind of like Gene Colan. And none of us knew what this guy was capable of. And he kind of exploded as we were working together. And the story, we've started reflecting that. Also, he, unlike me, had a classical education in artwork. And so, but like me, we're both raised Catholic. And I had decided along the way that Daredevil was a Catholic character. And so that started weaving its way through the story. And naturally, he started weaving the imagery around in ways that were fascinating. Like when Daredevil, wounded, goes back to his mom and collapses in her arms, David was the one who turned that into the Pietà. So in David's case, that was what it was like. With Bill Sienkiewicz, I never knew what to expect, and there were 2 scripts for every issue of Electra Assassin because I would write a full script, and his art would come back and it would be so adventurous that my script no longer applied, and I'd use a lot of the same words, but I would write it on new words and place them differently across the page to make the whole thing work. The point is to just make it work. It doesn't matter who gets the glory and whose work is precious.
Let me jump to Dark Knight 3 because I know we're running time and I want to take a couple of questions from the audience. I want to get to Dark Knight 3 for a second because, again, another type of collaborative process. Now you're collaborating with a co-writer, you're collaborating with artists. How has that evolved you along the way, too? And how do you feel about working in this environment on this particular story, especially since you're working on Dark Knight, which, again, is a very personal project for you? It's almost like you're letting people into your life in a way that's slightly, leaving yourself exposed.
Yeah. Well, it's. I'm lucky it's the people who they are. I'm very lucky it's Brian. If it were to be anybody, I'd want it to be him. I think he's the most outstanding writer to come into comics for a very, very long time. Then you look at the art team; it's impeccable. So what happens is, come on, this is comics. We're not here to have a painful journey. What happens is Brian and I hook up and we giggle like little kids and throw silly ideas around, and stories come out of it. Characters start doing things that nobody expects. It kind of goes back to something that the underground artist Robert Crumb wrote in many years ago. Is he said, you got to keep in mind it's only lines on paper, folks. Mm-hmm. We've got to enjoy ourselves. It's the only way you all are going to enjoy yourselves reading it.
That's great. And now we're into the back third of Dark Knight, and we see an end coming up to that story. And what do you see yourself doing past that?
Past Dark Knight?
Yeah.
I told you, man.
Besides Brother Power the Geek.
I told you.
No Brother Power the Geek.
Then there's the Bouncing Boy mega series. See, he doesn't know what he's sitting on.
I know. I could be sitting on Bouncing Boy right now.
The Amazing Return of Devil Dinosaur.
That's the other guys.
Yeah.
Oh, that's okay.
What I see, it's. I am a kid in a candy store. I am, of course, returning to Sin City. That is my home. I always go back to it. Thanks. And also, I've got a project that's been sitting fallow in my studio for several years that I'm dying to get back to, which is an addition to 300, which is the story of Xerxes. That's enough to keep me busy for a little while.
I'll hold you for a little bit. You know what? And I think we've got about 10 minutes left. So if we have a couple of questions, I'd like to get a couple of people on the mics. And let me see if I can get a couple of questions here right now. Let's start with you, sir, over there.
Thank you. Frank, huge fan. Love all your stuff. I'm sorry, Dan, I'm going to ask a question about Marvel. But what was it like when you were working on Elektra Lives Again? I think that's a fantastic work of yours.
Oh, thank you. What was it like?
Yeah, and like the art. That's a very interesting, like different art style.
Oh yeah, I when I did that, I had just become close buddies with Jeff Darrow, the rather amazing artist who we wound up doing Big Guy and Rusty the Boy Robot and Hardboiled together. He had a tremendous impact on my work. And I very much wanted to try to do the impossible, which was to be Jeff Darrow. And so I did, it's like one of the things you learn to do if you make a career of being an artist is you steal. And so I stole his techniques. I got the kind of parchment paper he used. I used the brand of markers he drew, and I started working in the line clear style that had been created by the French artist Hergé and advanced by the also French artist Jean Giraud or Mobius. And so I went through a year and a half of the most painful project of my entire career, doing Electrolibs again. Finished it, was proud of it, threw all my markers away, threw all my parchment paper away, picked up my brush, and got back to work.
Thank you.
Thank you. And this one right over here, sir.
So we've all seen your take on Batman versus Superman. I was wondering if you could quickly describe what you think a take between Batman versus Marv would be like.
And Dan and I are talking about Batman versus Marv.
We do talk about it.
Yeah, and there's that Batman versus Marv, and there's there's a certain Sin City Archie Comics crossover that's kind of in the works.
Over there.
Mr. Miller, thanks so much for your body of work. It's really
thank you.
inspired me all my life. One of the pivotal things that I love the most is the Ronin series.
Oh, thank you.
The way that you combine sort of the beauty of feudal Japan with sort of the post-apocalyptic technology. And I heard some rumblings about it coming out as a mini-series, and I'm really hoping that you're heavily involved in that so they don't ruin that. Sorry for putting you in a tough situation there. So.
I'm not in a tough situation at all. I'm not in it at all. Nobody told me.
Really? So no one told you about that at all?
Yes, you just did.
Well, please be involved in it. I don't want them to ruin it or whatever they're doing. So
They got to call me.
You got to call him.
thank you very much. And
Thank you.
Right there.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for being here. It's finally great to hear you.
Thank you.
I have a quick question about the inspiration and look behind the mutants in the Dark Knight Returns. What was the inspiration for them?
For what?
The mutants in the back.
Oh, the mutants. Yeah, well, it's very strange how that came about. I wanted to have, I felt I needed to be forces of chaos all throughout Gotham City. I didn't want it to just be Batman fights the same old villains again. I wanted all the old villains because they're really great villains, but I wanted to be a real symptom of moral decay, and I wanted there to be an enemy out there that was young to make it clear that Batman was old. And so I thought, people always do street gangs as being all scruffy and scary and so on. And I thought, why not make them like Toys R Us felons? And why not bright plastic outfits? And I threw in the visors just to make fun of the X-Men.
That's what I thought. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next over there.
Mr. Miller, it is an honor to speak with you. I'm
You're very kind.
Very happy about this. I wanted to know what your fondest memory of the Marvel bullpen was, and if you remembered the whack-offs.
The what?
Remember they, I think this was Mark Grunwald's idea. There was a paddleball thing that they would do in the office. And
The whack-offs?
Yes.
Boy, in my generation, that meant something else altogether.
Well, this is just what I was told what it was called, but I guess there was a competition within the bullpen where somebody would try to get the most,
They'd whack off the most?
paddleball paddleball scores as possible. You know, the string
Okay.
that's attached to the ball, and then it's attached to a paddle, and you play with it.
Oh, paddleball. Okay, thank you. Well, they whacked off a lot in the Marvel ball. What was the other part of your question?
What was your fondest memory of the Marvel bullpen?
Oh, there are a lot. There are a lot. I think just offhand, the presence I remember as being the most buoyant was Marie Severin, who just lit up the place whenever she came in and just bounced around it. But it was a fun place all around because it was both at DC and at Marvel, because most of the talent was in New York, and both companies were in New York. Those were places where we congregated to turn in work and then go out, frequently at Central Park and have lunch. And so they were community centers at the same time they were publishing houses. So the fond memories are abundant because that's where I met my friends.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Right over there. Next.
Yeah, Frank, quick question for you about Marv.
No more whack-off questions.
It's about Marv.
Yeah.
I wanted to know, is Marv or could Marv have been a combat veteran in an actual war?
No. It's a very good question because he certainly behaves like he'd have the training. But he is too much of a he's too much of a misfit from the beginning. He was born in a housing project. He was hard scrabble, fought life, and he's never been able to fit into society in any way. Had he accepted the structure of the military, he might have had a chance. But he never had a chance. Good question. Thank you. I've never been asked that one.
All right. Thank you.
Hi. Considering the actual time we just talked about combat veterans, I'm wondering, with the choices we have in this election, how does Martha Washington handle it? Because this is her time, right?
Martha Washington goes to war.
Yeah.
How would she handle this election?
How would she? What I'm seeing right now is how much you predicted this pretty well. Way back when we talked about Martha Washington, because she's in a little sped up version, it feels like.
Yeah.
What we're in.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, what's that like for you? To have predicted a lot of.
Well, I can't say it's the most pleasant feeling in the world. I mean, I don't think that anybody would call Martha Washington a utopian view of the future.
In the end.
Sorry?
In the end, it's more, it wraps itself. It takes 100 years or so.
Yeah. Sure, but it takes a while to get there, doesn't it? Yeah.
Okay, I think we got the next question. Keep us moving. Keep it right there.
Hi, I was just curious what your thoughts are on comic book culture becoming more mainstream, and if you think there's less creative freedom because of that.
Where do you find these guys? What a terrific question.
That's great.
But I've gone back and forth on that one, but because there are two sides to it. First, the negative side is going more mainstream, and means more visibility, which means we're more subject to the pressures that have caused every other medium to be censored to near oblivion in many ways. Obviously, not censorship outright, and obviously there's a tremendous amount of freedom in film and so on. But I mean, the pressure of, so I shouldn't have used the word censor, but the pressure of being bigger means pleasing more and more people, and you on the way become blander, and unless you really stick to your guns. There's no reason we have to. We got an awfully nice field here, and if more people want to join the party, fine. We just shouldn't change our game to just keep dragging more and more people in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Over here.
Mr. Miller, let's do an exercise here.
let's say,
What's that?
hypothetically speaking,
Exercise game.
yeah,
Just
yeah,
needs
cool
exercise.
one. Let's say that hypothetically speaking, you are writing Dark Knight 4, right? Okay, sounds good so far, right? Which of the more modern Batman villains would you consider putting into a story? When I talk about more modern Batman villains, I mean people like maybe Anarchy, the Red Hood, who's an anti-hero, Professor Pig, the Court of Owls, or Mr. Bloom probably.
The Court of Owls?
Yeah, the Court of Owls from the New 52. And,
Court of Owls.
Yeah, so it's like Gotham's Illuminati, basically, in a sense. Which of these villains would you consider putting in your new Dark Knight story, and why?
Right now?
Yeah. Which one sounds better?
I got other plans.
Really? Well, that sounds
Actually, he does, yes.
okay.
Thank you, know, right over here.
Hi, big fan.
Thank you.
As a fan of history and antiquity, I'm curious why you decided to do 300 as opposed to all the other stories, and if you ever wanted to do any other story from ancient history.
Yes. Oh, God, why do you keep giving me these wonderful questions? This is great. First off, I picked 300. In fact, I aspired to do 300 because I saw a clunky old movie when I was a little kid called 300 Spartans. And was so inspired by the story, I just swore to myself when I got good enough, I was going to turn that into a comic book. And even though I wasn't good enough, I went ahead and did it. But it was without question the best story I'd ever gotten my hands on. I couldn't have made it up. Every inch of it worked. Every character worked. And so that was the project that I waited to do forever. What was the second part of your question?
If you ever wanted to do any other story from antiquity.
Another from antiquity?
Yeah.
Yes, it's been sitting in my studio for a while. It just needs finishing. It's called Xerxes. It's the story of Xerxes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next over here.
Sorry. My question actually has to do with the Dark Knight Returns as well. One of the more interesting things about that story is that Batman's biggest enemy seems to be media and political backlash from his actions. I'm wondering, sort of what inspired that, and also wondering how Robin ended up handling it, because she just sort of how Robin ended up handling it. She just seemed to sort of follow his orders the entire book.
How did Carrie deal with that?
Yeah, I know.
I got to do something here.
Robin.
Because she would have been under some scrutiny too, I imagine.
She what in security?
No, would have been under like media and political scrutiny as well. I mean, no one would know who she was.
But if you see Carrie when she's first introduced, her parents are nothing but word balloons, and they're doing nothing but whining and smoking pot all the time, and she's got no real sense of there being any order or logic in the world. But she's inspired by the fact that there's somebody out there doing something about stuff. And so she decides that she's going to be Robin. Nobody ever volunteered for the job before. And I mean, Batman had to always pick these poor orphans up and drag them into combat. but she volunteered, and so she was the one who did that, and also she kind of had to do that because that costume had to be finally put on someone of the right gender.
You're not wrong.
Last question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Frank, you're a huge inspiration of mine.
Thank you.
I too want to get into comics, and
Great.
I actually applied to the Joe Kubert School of Comic Art, and I just want to say thank you for all your brilliant work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My question is, what was, when you were writing The Dark Knight, what was the most intense moment that you had to write in the...
Well, it wasn't a moment I wrote, it was a moment I drew. I kind of surprised myself at how emotional I got drawing it. It's when there's a sequence in it where Batman gets nearly mortally wounded and clambers off into the cave, and he's as good as dead, and the only person waiting for him is little Carrie, and he comes out naked and alive, and she throws herself at him, and he holds her. To me, that was the emotional peak of the entire series.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, Frank, as always, it's a true pleasure. I really enjoy doing these things, and I want to thank everybody here for joining us. And thank you again, Mr. Frank Miller, everybody.
That's it for now, but make sure you're keeping up with the latest chapter in the Dark Knight saga with next week's Dark Knight 3, The Master Race #6. See you tomorrow, Super Friends.